Hello. It is 1 o'clock, so I think we can get started. John, can I hear you?
Can you?
Yes, I can. Okay. A second ago, I saw you talking and I didn't hear anything, so I want to make sure we're on track. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Geographic Society of Chicago's February Travelogue. It is our first of 2025. My name is Natalie Witt, and I'm with the GSC office, and I will be moderating today's webinar. If this is your first time attending a GSC event, welcome and thank you for tuning in. Today's presenter is John Kokoris. John has spent a lifetime driving, camping, hiking, biking, and dining across the state, in addition to decades of working with the Illinois libraries. He is a natural guide for the state, or excuse me, he's a natural guide for anyone looking to learn more about their state or plan an affordable weekend getaway. John weaves history, folklore, food, and nature into lectures that highlight the best of travel in our underappreciated state and region. Before we begin, for those who have questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and we'll get to them at the end. John, thank you for being with us today and presenting. I'll hand it off to you whenever you're ready.
All right, I think I'm ready. Can everybody hear and everything? All right. Great. Well, thanks for the introduction, Natalie, and for all your help dealing with the usual headaches of Zoom. Thanks to everyone. I'm glad this is virtual because it's about 0 degrees out, at least uh, up where I am. I'm not sure how broad the membership of the society is. Maybe some of you are even tuning in from vacation homes in Florida or something like that. And thanks for maybe giving up your lunch. I've got my Abraham Lincoln approved lunch here. Abe used to eat either a biscuit and milk or an apple and milk, sometimes all three, I guess, if he was really feeling luxurious. So feel free to get your apples out and start crunching along. Um, I like to start with this mural. It's called Ag Time by the Champaign-based artist Billy Morrow Jackson. He was a professor at U of I for several decades, kind of in I think the 60s and 70s and 80s. But I love how exuberant this art portrays Central Illinois. And of course, we have Abraham Lincoln in the middle of it all, holding the glowing moral act. That's the act that kind of paved the way for U of I to be established. Um, and here's yet another piece by Jackson. So also kind of insane and psychedelic. So if you know and love Central Illinois, you'll probably recognize a lot of these um, little characters in this painting. So your guide today, well, me, I'm a U of I alum, and I go down to my alma mater a few times a year. And I got into the Illinois kind of travelogue business. My wife and I were dating about a decade ago, and she worked weekends and nights, and I worked weekdays. We didn't have a lot of time off together, so we became very adept at finding like day trips, half-day trips, overnight trips, things like that. Although, as you heard in the introduction, I've been kind of scooting around the state my whole life. Um, the other reason I do this is because I'm kind of stubborn and prideful, I guess, in terms of there's a lot of hate for downstate Illinois. A lot of people who say it's flat, it's ugly, it's boring. So I'm out here trying to set the record straight and preaching the good word about Illinois. And I assume if you're all members of the Chicago Geographic Society, you might already be kind of attuned to some of the many hidden gems across our state. But I can't do it alone, so I'm joined today by Abraham Lincoln. This is, I think, the earliest known portrait of Abe. This is, of course, before he grew his beard. And he'll be kind of along for part of the ride. So we weave in a little bit of Abraham Lincoln history as we travel about the center of our state. Oops, those are a bunch of pictures of my daughter. I just gave this talk at Riverside Public Library, so I included these pictures of her. playing there. So before we go any further, where is Central Illinois? Here we are on the map. I think it's one of the harder regions of our state to define because the edges kind of blur into other kind of more distinct regions. So the definition I'll be using today is here on the screen. Um, and I kind of use the Illinois River as the western and northern boundary, also I-80 up to the top, and then I-70, which is a line between Indianapolis and St. Louis, kind of the bottom. You'll notice the southwestern portion. I don't really have a good excuse for where I drew the line there, but basically, once you approach the Metro East St. Louis area, I feel like you're in a different region. So it's kind of like a fuzzy edge triangle between Peoria and Springfield and Champaign, you might say. But why? Why do we want to go there? Why is it interesting? People are sometimes aggressive in their a desire to poo-poo this part of the state. Because if your main experience with it is driving down I-57 or I-55, I will confess, in certain ways, it is a little bit boring. But if you venture off the interstate, even for a few minutes, you'll quickly find things to love all across central Illinois. One of the things that I find like thematically the most interesting about it is that it really is kind of this crossroads for the entire country, and it always has been, and it kind of is on a number of different levels. I'll give just a few examples. Ecologists use this word ecotone or ecotone. I'm not actually sure how to say it, and to describe what Illinois was kind of in prehistory, pre-settlement. And it's this kind of edge between different ecosystems. So as you look across geologically across the state, you'll see periods where it's covered in forest, covered in ice, covered in swamps, covered in prairies. See bison kind of emerge and it become a dominant species and then recede. It's this kind of like balancing act where we are. It's kind of always in flux. And then kind of culturally too, Illinois was originally settled by Southerners coming up through Kentucky, through the Cumberland Gap. But later on was more dominated by Yankee settlers from the Northeast. And you see a lot of national drama between those two groups kind of play out at a smaller scale in central Illinois. So it's just a really interesting kind of touching point or blending point of different movements across the continent. So I start with this Rachel Lindsay poem. Would I might rouse the Lincoln in you all, that which is gendered in the wilderness, from lonely prairies and God's tenderness. Imperial soul, star of a weedy stream, born where the ghosts of buffalo still dream, whose spirit hoofbeats storm above his grave, above that breast of earth and prairie fire, fire that freed the slave. Lindsay, he was certainly problematic in some of his viewpoints, but he was a prominent poet who lived in Springfield for most of his career. And the thing that I find most interesting about him was he actually walked across the entire country. He walked from Florida up to Illinois and then from Illinois down to New Mexico with no money, and he just recited poems for food and shelter. This would have been in the early 1900s. And so he's one of the last kind of wandering bards of our country's history, and a big admirer of Lincoln. So my goal for the rest of this presentation is to rouse the Lincoln in everyone watching. So we'll begin with a little geography and history lesson before we get into more of the travel talk. But I only have an hour, so I'm only going to go back about 11,000 years to begin the history lesson here. You might know this as geography buffs, fellow geography buffs, but the state is as flat as it is because it was covered in glaciers for many tens of thousands of years, probably much longer. The last glacier that covered us, this Wisconsin glacier, was here from about 75,000 years ago to maybe about 11,000 years ago. And as it invaded our state from the north, it flattened out the hills and filled in the valleys and left this kind of flat, muddy mess. And then when it receded, basically the landscape that we're familiar with, at least the topography we're familiar with, was the result of this glaciation. And if you've been up to Galena or down to the Shawnee National Forest, it's very hilly and rocky. That's because these glaciers never smushed that area. But central Illinois certainly was smushed. And you'll see the legacy of this, a prehistoric occurrence, in more modern maps. This is a map from the time of statehood, 1818. And as I flip between these maps, you'll see the place where the glacier was is also kind of the last place to be developed. Chicago, obviously, kind of an exception to that rule, although Chicago did not exist at the time of statehood. And if you look at this beautiful terrain map from I think it's from 1850, the 1850s, you'll also see that same area kind of covered in prairie and wetland. So that's kind of the prehistoric setting for what we know today. So how can we even see what that was like? We have a few photos from the last period where there were still wetlands. This is from the Kankakee area from the 1890s, this photo. This is Loda Prairie, which is a remnant prairie. There's a few remnant prairies left across the state. And then there's also some beautiful restoration projects underway. This is Emiquon off the Illinois River near Havana. And there's also art that we can use to imagine what it would have been like, reading some of the recollections of the first people to write down their experiences here. But the prairie, like I said, it's kind of a new ecosystem, geologically speaking. It's only about 10,000 years old, and it wasn't always this way, and it certainly isn't quite that way anymore. But how it lasted during this formative period of our history was a combination of wildfires. Lightning would strike and burn the prairie, and that kept like woody plants from growing. But the grasses that had deep roots, the grasses would burn away, but they'd grow right back. There's also grazing from bison for thousands of years. Then the Illinois Confederacy, those were the Native Americans who were present when we first developed a historic record of the state. And they saw what was happening with wildfires and with bison, and they were able to kind of utilize those strategies to manage the prairie themselves, to kind of expand it and keep it from fading away so that it would continue to be a good hunting ground and fishing ground for them. Then, of course, when we first start to learn about Central Illinois in the historic record, it's because of French explorers. Marquette and Joliet passed through. They were the first to really write down anything describing Central Illinois as they went up the Illinois River. And then LaSalle and Tonti, both kind of rascals. I wouldn't say they were good people necessarily. They were here to really make money and really capitalize on that bison fur trade. Tonti he's kind of lesser known than the other three probably, but a real character. He had like a hook hand. His crew mutinied around Peoria when they were setting up a settlement there. Peoria is the oldest permanent settlement in the state that still exists, and this is a photo of a reconstruction of the fort there. So I believe that, and I apologize, my notes aren't on the screen, so I'm doing a little bit of estimating with the dates today, but around 1680 was when a settlement was first established in the Peoria area by the French. And these are a couple of books scattered throughout my presentation are a few recommended reads that are available in the library system in Chicagoland. I'll send a list of those over to Natalie, and if anyone wants a printed handout, they can get it that way. These are both relatively recent books, so kind of the cutting edge history. So 1818 is when Illinois becomes a state. It's also around the time of just shortly after Lincoln's birth. Lincoln was born in 1809. I use these woodcuts from the Czech American artist Charles Czerzik, who made them in the 1930s, which is a great time for kind of Lincoln nostalgia. A lot of good Lincoln art was produced in the 30s. They're really beautiful, I think, like simple tributes to various stages of Lincoln's life. So he's born in Kentucky. He moves to Indiana as a boy. His mother passes away when he's about 9 years old. He mainly teaches himself to read and write. He had a little bit of help or encouragement from his mother and his stepmother, and a few months maximum cumulatively of schooling at a very primitive school system. And in 1830, right around the time he came of age, around 21 years old, he crossed over into Illinois and became what was then called a sucker, the same way we still call Indiana residents Hoosiers. That was the nickname for Illinoisans at the time. Thankfully, we got out of that nickname. And when Lincoln arrives in Illinois, there's kind of three major historical trends that are all of a sudden happening, that are transforming the state and setting the scene for his kind of rise to prominence. And everything that happens to Lincoln, you think about the poverty he was born into and how someone like that ends up as one of the greatest presidents in the nation's history. And really, I mean, it's a testament to his skills and talents, of course, but it's also he was kind of lucky and privileged in a way as to when he arrived in Illinois. So these three things were happening that I'm going to quickly go through. And I by no means am suggesting these are good things overall, but they happened and they made Illinois kind of a central part of national history in the middle of the 1800s. So the first is what's called Indian removal, or the forced expulsion of Native Americans from Illinois. This concluded in the 1830s. The last of the Illinois Confederacy left the state in 1832, and the Potawatomi Death March occurred in 1837, and about 900 of the last Native Americans were marched through Springfield and Decatur and out to Kansas. That was a 660-mile march, and 41, I believe, 41 of those marchers perished, most of them children. So really, really horrible chapter in our national history and in central Illinois history. But it kind of explains partially why there was so much opportunity for someone like Lincoln. He was arriving to a kind of a newly vacated land. And he's certainly not blameless in that story. This is a statue of Lincoln, the only statue of Lincoln in military uniform. It's in Dixon, just outside of our area of study today. But he enlisted at 22 years old in the Black Hawk War, and he marched up to northern Illinois and southwestern Wisconsin. He didn't see any action, but he was part of that federal project to remove Native Americans from the state. And it's in my opinion, a pretty serious blemish on his otherwise pretty wonderful record. The second major event that happened in the 1830s was John Deere's invention of the self-scouring steel plow. This also happened just outside of our area of study in northern Illinois. It's called Grand Detour now, and there's a really wonderful kind of restored John Deere site, historical site, where you can learn about what happened. But long story short, he made it much easier to clear the grasses out of the prairies and open them for further settlement. So not only are there no longer Native Americans hunting in the area. But now we're able to remove all the grass that was just too tough for more primitive forms of plowing to really make it worthwhile for settlement. Now, all of a sudden, this vast, vast space, if you think back to that earlier map we were looking at, this vast space is now not only able to be farmed, but the Americans soon learned this is some of the richest soil in the world because it had been kind of undisturbed for so many thousands of years. And so the result is this map shows the parts of the state that had prairie at the time of settlement and statehood. And then the whole, if you combine every scrap of prairie left today, it fits on this tiny little dot. So that's kind of depressing in my opinion. But it's another factor that explains this was happening right when Lincoln moves to Illinois. And the result now is the landscape that's more familiar, not really prairie, but soybean fields and cornfields, as far as the eye can see when you drive down the highway in central Illinois. And a lot of us city dwellers kind of associate going out into the countryside with going out into nature, but if you haven't really thought about it before, it kind of is, it can kind of be shocking to learn like, oh, this isn't nature at all. There's nothing natural about this. It's just as engineered as you know, the Chicago suburbs, for sure, or even Chicago itself. It's a really man-made landscape. And the third major shift happening in the 1830s, right when Lincoln arrives, is the establishment of the first railroad in Illinois. That's in the late 30s, I believe 1837 or 38. A little bit slow going at first. I believe there was a depression happening then economically, but then an explosion. Again, sorry, I don't have my dates on screen. I think, oh, this is from 1855. This is the very kind of early days of railroad building. So Lincoln's been in the state at this point about 15 years. You see the Illinois Central. Not sure if you all can see my mouse as I move it around the screen, but it's this kind of long line from southernmost Illinois up to Galena, and then from Chicago down to Centralia. And in 1855, that line hadn't even been completed yet. So just a few years later, here's the Illinois Central highlighted. You see, this is the longest railroad in the world at the time of its completion in 1856. So Illinois really a major hub for transportation because of the railroad and because of its situation in the middle of the country. You can move goods from Lake Michigan to the Gulf of Mexico very easily, and you can move people too. So you see explosive growth, and economically and kind of politically, I want to stress the importance of the railroads, especially to central Illinois, because the Illinois Central, the main railroad here in Illinois at that time, was the first federal land grant railroad. And this area that's highlighted in pink represents land that was given to the Illinois Central as a reward for each mile of track they built. So they were then able to sell all that land off and develop it commercially and agriculturally and profit off of it. So they were the perhaps most powerful, certainly the most powerful private player in the Illinois political scene. And Abraham Lincoln, not only did he benefit indirectly from that development, but he was also on retainer for the Illinois Central. He was one of their many lawyers for a good chunk of his career. So he personally profited off of this too. But if you really think about, oh, and here's the railroad, I think in the 1870s. So this is just a generation after the very first mile of track was built. And you just see the railroads just crisscrossing the state. Hardly any community was not touched by the railroad. And in fact, the ones that weren't often withered away and vanished, or picked up and literally moved their buildings to be on the railroad. So it really shaped and dominated Illinois geography, especially in central Illinois. So before I kind of get into actually exploring the region, just to kind of sum up that history, especially at the moment that Lincoln arrived, you just think about this completely revolutionary technology happening just at the same time that the land is being cleared of its, original or maybe rightful inhabitants for settlement, and also tens of thousands of years of soil nutrients suddenly available to farmers. You've set the scene for this explosion in growth, and that's right when Lincoln enters the scene. So it kind of helps contextualize the world he moved to. It was on the one hand, it was very primitive. It was the frontier when he arrived, and it wasn't an easy life. But on the other hand, he really had everything going for him in terms of a more kind of holistic, systemic view. Like it was just hugely, hugely important time for Illinois and for the nation. So I've divided the region into kind of 3 road trips that we will kind of cruise through for the next half hour. And this first segment, I admit, is a little controversial. Is it really central Illinois? I feel like I justified myself earlier, but I accept criticism. People want to hear about Starved Rock and things like that. So I snuck it into my my report here. So that's where we'll begin. So we're going to kind of go down the Illinois River from Chicago. Then we're going to head back up I-55 or Route 66. And then we'll head back down in the direction of Champaign at the end. So this road trip, if you follow it literally, you will not end up back at home in Chicago. Just my disclaimer. You can kind of pick and choose what sounds interesting to you. And you can kind of pair 2 legs together, or it's just a way to kind of present all the many great things that Central Illinois has to offer. So our first stop kind of out of Chicagoland is Ottawa. If you haven't been to Ottawa, it's a really great kind of county seat, courthouse square type of town. I love every town I've ever been to in Illinois. So don't get me wrong, they're all great. They're all worth seeing. But some of them are kind of, struggling in certain ways. Ottawa is not. I feel like they have a really thriving, fun downtown. There's a Lincoln Douglas debate site. There's a beautiful, like I said, courthouse and kind of shopping district around it. The I&M Canal passes through, and there's some cool trails to walk and ride your bike down. One story I like to tell about Ottawa is about Jim Gray. He was enslaved in Missouri, and he self-emancipated, or AKA escaped to free soil in Illinois, but he was caught, and he was moved up to Ottawa to stand trial on whether he would be returned to his former owner in Missouri. And this story really kind of captures the cultural tension of the region. At the time, he was tried, and I don't want to say he lost the trial, but basically it was decided that he would go down to Springfield and have his case heard by a higher court. And when they were getting ready to transfer him, a crowd of abolitionists stormed into the courthouse, overtook the marshal, and helped Jim Gray out of the courthouse and into a waiting carriage that sped away, and he was able to escape across the canal onto Canada to his more permanent freedom. So it's not only is it a dramatic and interesting story, but it really kind of shows you there were kind of pro-slavery trials happening, or trials that were kind of furthering the slave system in Illinois at the time. But there were also kind of fierce abolitionists. And we often think of Central Illinois as this land of Lincoln, this cradle of emancipation. But that's not really true. It is where Lincoln was from, but it's also where Douglas was from. And he notoriously was kind of trying to prolong the existence of slavery. And Lincoln may have won the presidential election in his hometown of Springfield, but he actually lost the vote in Sangamon County. It was very close on both counts. So this was by no means like an abolitionist hotbed. What it really was like a battleground state, where these two kind of ideas of America were coming into conflict. And that too kind of propelled Lincoln forward. It makes sense that one of these leading voices in the anti-slavery debate would come from Illinois, because that's where a lot of the tension was. Our next stop is just a few miles west in Utica, or North Utica, so named because the town had to pick up and move at one point north. But it's a charming town. It's a little touristy. I don't say that to denigrate it, but a lot of knickknack shops and little restaurants and bars. And that's also the home of the Burgoo Fest every fall. So if you're interested in eating a pioneer stew out of this kind of rusty metal barrel, it's a very fun place to go do that. The LaSalle County History Museum has a little campus around the canal in Utica that's really, I think, one of the most impressive small town historical sites you can visit. Really, really great place to learn more about Illinois history. And of course, you've got Starved Rock. I'm pretty sure everyone on this call knows about Starved Rock and possibly has been there. And Matheson, it's kind of presented as like a best kept secret, but a lot of people do know about it. It's only about 5 minutes from Starved Rock, and it's just as beautiful, and it's a little less crowded. But even if you're going to hike at Matheson, Starved Rock is worth a stop, in my opinion, for their lodge, which has a fantastic brunch and dinner menu. So worth stopping there. That lodge was built by the CCC in the 1930s, and it's just a really beautiful place. So further on down the river, we'll reach the Peoria area, and this is called the world's most beautiful drive. Supposedly Teddy Roosevelt called it that when he visited the Peoria area, and it really is breathtaking. Although if you look into the history of whether Teddy Roosevelt actually said that, it might not be true. But the people of Peoria Heights certainly don't care if it's true or not, because that is what they call it, and it is indeed a really, really breathtaking drive. Lots of little picnic tables along the way, and breathtaking overlooks. And if you really want a good view, you can go up this water tower in Peoria Heights. It's free. It's hours of operation are limited. So look into it before you arrive. It's a great way to survey the Illinois River Valley. I really like the Obed and Isaacs. There's a few of them across the state, but they're a brewery, and they've got great food, and they always operate out of these historical sites like this church in Peoria. So if you want to eat a delicious meal in a church, this is the place to go do it. There's a street called High Street that has a lot of mansions that kind of are up on a bluff overlooking Peoria. That's a nice place to get out and walk around. There's also a giant oak there that is across the street from all these beautiful mansions that I think is the oldest tree in Peoria, and it probably predates any European settlement in the state. So it's kind of nice to stare at it and contemplate the things that tree has seen. A little bit further downstream, we get to Lewistown. This is the site of the cemetery that inspired Spoon River by Edgar Lee Masters. If you're familiar with Spoon River, it's a seminal work of poetry that came out of Illinois in the early 1900s. And basically the story is told through kind of these epitaphs on gravestones and these little snapshots, obituary type vignettes about each person in the cemetery. And the poems, they stand alone as stories, but they kind of interweave and tell a broader story about the town. And it was an important work of literature at the time. There was a lot of snobbery. This was during the time of urbanization of our country, and the literary elites were kind of turning up their nose at small town America. And Edgar Lee Masters wrote this book of poems that kind of pushed back against that and said, look, people in small towns have interesting lives, and they're every bit as sophisticated and interesting as a big city resident might be. Of course, Masters left Illinois, and I think he went up to New York, so he didn't exactly practice what he preached. But many of the stories in Spoon River were inspired by real people, and there's a nice little tour you can take if you're into Spoon River or cemeteries. It's a great place to stop. Here's the book. And Dixon State Mounds is nearby, and it's probably one of the best places, rivaling Cahokia Mounds near St. Louis, to learn about the prehistoric kind of Mississippian people who built mounds across the state. Dixon Mounds Museum. It's a wonderful place, and they have nice grounds too to walk around. A little bit further south down the river is Havana, and across the river is Emiquon Wildlife Preserve. And if you're traveling at the right time, you can see tens of thousands or millions of birds passing through. This is a photo of snow geese, which don't live in Illinois, but I happened to be there at the right time and see this cloud of thousands and thousands of birds migrating through. And this was all farmland that was flooding all the time. It was not very economically productive. It was also washing a lot of pesticides and fertilizer into the watershed. So kind of a combination of state and federal and nonprofit actors got together and reclaimed that land for nature, and they're turning it back into kind of something like it was before humans started to mess with it too much. Havana, it's a little bit, there's some vacant storefronts and things, but it's a really, really cute town. I love Havana. You can stay at the Riverbend Inn. There's a couple of cute restaurants and coffee shops in town. You can walk down to the river. I think Al Capone used to go duck hunting in Havana. So it's a good place to stop as you're kind of crossing the river from west to east. And I believe it is where we wrap up our tour of the Illinois River Valley of Central Illinois. Pardon me. A few things I didn't really get into. Morton, just outside of Peoria, has a pumpkin festival. I saw this like pumpkin pie eating contest that transfixed me. Every time I close my eyes, I am transported back to the moment where I saw wave after wave of children and teenagers and adults eating as many pumpkin pies as they could, often throwing up on stage. But really cute, fun festival. Most of the pumpkin pie filling in the world is produced in Morton. There's a couple great bike trails, rail trails. Jubilee College State Park is a little bit into Western Illinois, but it's a nice, like, old college that's now kind of preserved as a state park. And Beardstown has some neat Lincoln history. So now we'll head up to Route 66. This is where we're going to spend the most of the rest of my talk here. New Salem. So this is coming kind of east from the Illinois River. This is where Lincoln ended up when he moved to Illinois. He spent about a year around Decatur, helping his father and mother-in-law settle in, and then he packed his bags and moved on out and to make a life of his own. It's said that New Salem kind of like rose to meet Lincoln and then disappeared after he left. But he showed up, he arrived, to quote one of his neighbors, like a piece of driftwood with no real purpose or money or idea of what he wanted to do. And he left as kind of the Lincoln we start to recognize today. More of these woodcuts show he was the postmaster, he was a surveyor, he was a shopkeeper. He actually lost a lot of money on the store that he ran, and that debt kind of plagued him for most of the rest of his time in Illinois. And he studied law on his own there, and eventually became a lawyer, I want to say in 1837, which is also when he left New Salem. Um, how did he make a name for himself? Believe it or not, wrestling. He wrestled the local gang of toughs in the Sangamon County area, and it's unclear whether he won the match or just performed honorably. But he won the respect of his townspeople through his physical prowess, not the mental prowess that we have come to appreciate. That's also how I was given the opportunity to speak here to you all today. I actually had to wrestle a bunch of other presenters, and I came out on top. His first love died, Anne Rutledge. There's a lot of debates about how much he and Anne were in love. And I don't have time to get into that, but it's a very interesting story. It's all told by Lincoln's good friend and soon-to-be law partner, William Herndon. This is one of my all-time favorite books. It's worth tracking down and reading. It's the first work of oral history in the United States. Herndon met Lincoln when he was a boy, and Lincoln was just arriving to New Salem. And Herndon followed Lincoln to Springfield, lived with Lincoln for a spell, and Lincoln gave Herndon every chance. Herndon was a bit of a screw up, and for reasons unknown to anyone, including Herndon himself, Lincoln offered Herndon the chance to be his law partner. And Herndon has this fierce attachment to Lincoln. And after Lincoln died, Herndon went around Illinois and Indiana and Kentucky and interviewed every surviving person who ever knew Abraham Lincoln and compiled it all in copious notes, which were distilled into this book that is just a really fantastic snapshot into history in central Illinois at that time. So Lincoln arrives in Springfield in 1837. He walks into the store there and asks the shopkeeper, how much does it cost to buy a bed? And the shopkeeper says $17. And Honest Abe, who is so named because of his kind of desire to make a fair deal and never lead anyone on, Abe says, well, I don't have $17. I wonder if you might let me have the bed anyways. And if this lawyer business takes off for me, I will pay you back. And he says, if it doesn't, then I'm afraid I will never pay you back. And the shopkeeper, Joshua Speed, looks at Lincoln and I guess sizes him up to be a good guy and says, you know what? I've got a big bed upstairs. Why don't you just sleep in bed with me until you have enough money to make your own way? So Lincoln and Speed end up being roommates for about 3 years. And at some point, a young Billy Herndon follows Lincoln to Springfield and is sleeping on the floor in that room too. So a very funny start in Springfield for Lincoln, in my opinion. He also meets Mary Todd and gets married. And, you know, she has her own controversial history we also won't get into today. But they had a, you know, tumultuous marriage in certain ways. Neither one of them was, I would say, the ideal spouse. And there's plenty of stories about how Mary yelled at Lincoln and threw hot coffee at him and made, in Herndon's words, made his domestic life a living hell. But Lincoln and her were obviously in love. He you know, valued her inputs and her opinion. And she is often kind of credited for kind of showing him the way to the White House. She always believed he would be president, even though when they met, he was nothing but a poor country lawyer. So she was the driving force behind Lincoln's ambition. Some great books about Lincoln's kind of melancholy and his tumultuous kind of inner life. Lincoln's Melancholy is one of them. That's nonfiction. It was a bestseller. And Lincoln and the Bardo is one of my favorite books. It's totally fictional. It actually takes place in Washington after Lincoln's son Willie dies. But he also lost a child in Springfield, so it's kind of thematically relevant still. but it's this amazing kind of obviously fictional meditation on grief and loss and the meaning of life and the afterlife, kind of told through this kind of interesting, quirky Lincoln prism. If you haven't read that, it's just a beautiful, a sad but beautiful book. Here's Lincoln's home. And one point to stress here is this was his home for the last few years he lived in Springfield. What was always his home, it was the first house he and Mary bought, but it was very small for most of the time they lived there. And Lincoln was out lawyering. He was on the circuit in the mid 1850s. And when he came home, he noticed that Mary had added a gigantic addition to their house, kind of without consulting him. He stopped a neighbor, legend has it, and says, "Pardon me, sir, do you know where the house of Abraham Lincoln might be? I thought it was right around here." So the house that you can visit now, it's part of the National Park Service. It is, it was actually one of the more pretentious, spacious houses in the neighborhood at the time, but it is really not the house. Well, physically, it is the house that Lincoln lived in, but it's much, much bigger than where he and his 4 kids spent a lot of their time, and his wife. The House of Lincoln, it's another work of historical fiction. It's by the author of Loving Frank, which is a popular book about Frank Lloyd Wright's wife. But it's told through the point of view of a maid in the Lincoln house. And it's not usually the type of book that I read, but thought it did a really good job capturing life in Springfield in the mid 1800s. Here's Lincoln's circuit. He really traveled around central Illinois extensively, and to this day, as you travel, you will see a plaque. Anywhere Lincoln spent the night, anywhere he went to the bathroom, there's a sign about it. But another secret to his success was that, he spent 4 to 6 months a year on the road away from home, but it gave him a chance to kind of meet, hear from the people across the entire center of the state, and also meet a lot of the elites in these various towns. So that paved the way for his presidency. They're really, really, as you travel, there's too many of these sites to name in an hour, but there's these really charming stories of Lincoln's exploits in each of these towns. He'd play baseball with the other lawyers. He'd stay up all night at the local tavern telling dirty jokes and funny stories. And so much of that has been preserved. These little moments that kind of get lost in the great historical figure of Lincoln. When you're in Springfield, you can see the old state capitol. It's actually just been restored. It's reopening in March. So it's a great time to visit. Unfortunately, the law office of Lincoln and Herndon is still under construction, probably for the whole year. But I have this quote that I kind of got a little misty-eyed reading this quote while I stood outside the law office. But he went to work for the last time the day before he went off to Washington, D.C. And just to kind of tie up some loose ends. And he turns to Herndon and he says about the sign, the Lincoln and Herndon sign hanging above the door. He says to Herndon, "Let it hang there undisturbed. Give our clients to understand the election of a president makes no change in the firm of Lincoln and Herndon. I'm coming back sometime and we'll go right on practicing law as if nothing ever happened." So it's kind of this sad, touching scene to think about. Oh, yes, and somebody actually chimed in that Vachel Lindsay's home can be visited in Springfield, Illinois. Last I checked, you have to make an appointment to go there, but it is free. He was the poet that we started this talk with, at his home's in Springfield. Lincoln's tomb is a moving and beautiful place where most of Lincoln's family is buried. His son Robert, who went on to be a statesman in his own right, he was not buried there because his wife didn't want him to be overshadowed by his father. So he's buried, I think, in Chicago. I should look that up. But it's a really beautiful, moving experience to go there, especially if you've been reading all these books about Lincoln's life. And I like to just talk about the granddaddy of all Lincoln biographies, in my opinion. is this relatively recent book by Michael Burlingame. It's actually a 2-volume set. It's 2,000 pages. It's a 100-hour audiobook that is available through the library system. But he just gets into so much fascinating detail and really humanizes Lincoln and explores his psychology and captures so much, especially the Illinois days of his just day-to-day life. And, I'm not a Lincoln worshiper. I don't think the man was perfect. He had his flaws for sure, and Burlingame gets into those. But it's hard not to like him and admire him as a fellow human if you read this book. The Lincoln Museum is great. It's a little bit like Disney-esque, in my opinion. If you're really into Lincoln, like it's still worth seeing. It's still a cool museum, really well done. But it's really, I think, great for families and people who are kind of newer to the Lincoln. Oh, Robert Lincoln is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Thank you very much for that. Now I will not make a fool of myself when I next give this talk. But if you actually read about the history of the Lincoln Museum as it stands today, it was designed with the help from Disney's Imagineers. So Disney Corporation actually had a hand in designing this site. This book, Land of Lincoln, is a really funny travelogue, all about kind of like Lincoln nostalgia and Lincoln tourism. It's a great book. It's also an audiobook you can get from the library. But he has several chapters about the museum. The Capitol is obviously beautiful. It's actually a taller dome than the U.S. Capitol, and a great place to take a free tour. The Dana Thomas House is a Frank Lloyd Wright designed home, my favorite, and I've seen many of his buildings. And you can also take a free tour there. And they actually got a huge grant for restoration that's going to begin in 2026. So this year is a really good time to go see it because it'll presumably be closed for a while. And of course, the 1908 race riot is also worth noting. This was one of the worst kind of race riots in the United States. Really, really tragic episode that kind of grew out of tension between the immigrant community and the African-American community. Dozens of people died, but it spurred the creation of the NAACP. That organization actually kind of rose as a direct response to this. This race riot, there were worse ones in the country, but this one really captured the nation's attention because it's Lincoln's home, and people thought, wow, this can even happen in the home of Abraham Lincoln. Like it's truly a national problem, and it needs a national kind of organization to address it. The horseshoe is kind of the most famous dish in Springfield. It's a very gloppy, heavy, meaty, potatoy, open-faced sandwich. Darcy's and Charlie Parker's are the best place to grab that meal. Heading up Route 66, Lincoln, the only town named after Abraham Lincoln while he was alive. He was a lawyer for the railroad, and they just let him have a town named after himself. Atlanta has these giant statues. This one's actually from Cicero, this hot dog wielding muffler man. A beautiful little library there, but be careful not to speed as you leave because there is a giant policeman hiding behind this service station. Funk's Grove is a nice little pioneer area. You can tap your own maple syrup and visit the Funk Family Prairie House Museum for free by appointment. One of my favorite house museums I've ever seen. Bloomington, fantastic architecture town. They have the Constitution Trail on the old Illinois Central right-of-way. There's me on a bridge. Great walking and biking trail. Just a really nice courthouse square to walk around and see these beautiful sights. This fountain was made by Laredo Taft, who is a big presence in Central Illinois. You might know some of his works from Northern Illinois, like Eternal Silence at Graceland Cemetery, or this Father Time, kind of Fountain of Time, down on the south side. But he spent a lot of his time in Central Illinois, and his work is scattered throughout the region. One restaurant I love to shout out is Pop-Up Chicken. They're actually expanding into Springfield, I just heard. But it's a great place to get a chicken sandwich, but more importantly, a smash burger. The smash burger, it's a thin and crispy flat patty that's kind of enjoying a moment right now among foodies, but it's actually born in Bloomington. This is a strange photo that I have. These are actors portraying the inventors of Steak and Shake, standing right next to their tomb in the cemetery in Bloomington. So just one of the many weird situations I got myself into as an Illinois traveler. But Steak and Shake is from Bloomington, and they kind of created this delicious smash burger concept. Lincoln gave his famous lost speech in Bloomington that kind of established him as a leader of the new Republican Party. There's this is the site of that speech now, which is littered with plaques telling you about the speech, but it's one of the most like depressing sites that you'll see, this parking garage. And David Davis was a judge on the circuit when Lincoln was a lawyer and became one of Lincoln's closest friends. He ended up managing Lincoln's campaign and was rewarded with a seat on the Supreme Court. So very, very prominent Illinois and just a funny friend of Lincoln with many, many funny quotes and just a great relationship with Lincoln. You can go visit his house in Bloomington. It's a great museum, really, really nice place to spend an hour or two. A few more things, and again, this will all kind of be chronicled on my handout that I will send out. A lot going on in Bloomington normal. Pontiac, another just beautiful, charming little courthouse square town. And Midway National Tallgrass Prairie is very pretty at certain times of the year. And then we'll wrap things up quickly, heading down kind of the I-57 corridor. Of course, we're taking the back roads. Let me pop over to my Q&A here. On the most beautiful drive in Peoria, there is a castle that looks fabulous. I've actually seen that castle, but I too have never kind of been there at the right time. I think when I looked into that castle in Peoria, like it might have been open like one Saturday a month or something, but it's certainly worth checking out if you're in Peoria. Thanks for that question. The Kankakee River, there's a state park and there's a couple smaller nature preserves. If you're into wetlands and river restorations, it's an interesting place to get out of the car and stretch your legs. Paxton on Illinois 45, which kind of parallels 57. Between Kankakee and Champaign, you'll pass through a number of really cute small towns. Paxton is my favorite. Just hamburgers. You stand there, you watch them kind of sizzle up your burger right in front of you. It's $3 for just a delicious, delicious hamburger. Kind of bad hours though. So always check your restaurant hours before you plan on stopping for a meal. And one of my favorite libraries is in Paxton. Champaign, great place to walk around. The Quad, this is another Laredo Taft sculpture there. They've got a beautiful library. Great stuff happening in downtown Urbana and downtown Champaign. Always some sort of performance or lecture or festival happening in Champaign, Urbana, including the Sweet Corn Festival, which I think is in August. It's a fun time to visit. Great restaurants. Black Dog, one of the top rated barbecue places in the state, and sometimes it's even made national lists. Jarling's Custard Cup is right off the highway if you're really just passing through. It's a good, cute little stop. Warning, if you eat at Black Dog, you'll end up looking like my daughter here. It's a hearty meal. Allerton is like a former estate that's now a park with beautiful sculptures and gardens and some natural areas to walk around. There's not a ton of natural beauty in central Illinois left, but this is certainly, if you like being outside in a pretty scene, this is a place to stop. Kickapoo is a reclaimed coal mine, and I have only a few slides left. I know I'm closing in on 2 o'clock here. Sorry, I went a little over. You can paddle on the Vermilion River. It's a small park, but it's quite pretty. And I kind of end with this this trigger warning here. You might want to close your eyes and mute your audio here because I'm about to address a possible visit to the state of Indiana. Park County, which is just southeast of the Champaign area. It's really pretty. They have the highest concentration of covered bridges in the country, and Turkey Run State Park, which is a really cool place to go for some kind of moderately rugged hikes. About as rugged as you can get in the kind of Midwest, Central Illinois type region. Arcola and Arthur are these two towns just south of Champaign that have a lot of Amish presence on the outskirts. Yoder's restaurant is fantastic Amish cooking, and Arcola is the broom capital of America if you're into brooms. It's a cute, quirky little town. And we don't have time to get into these sites, but they're worth noting and looking into if the titles appeal to you. Look them up. So that's enough. You're probably clutching your head like this Laredo Taft sculpture at U of I, telling me that my time is up and I should stop talking. So thank you. I am kind of on tour at different libraries around Chicagoland. So come meet me in person if you'd like. All my dates are online, as well as my contact info.
Thank you so much, John. We appreciate it. I'm glad that you won the wrestling competition to get here today. So thank you so much. It looks like we answered all the questions while you were going through it, so we don't have any more that we need to address at the end here. But we do want to thank all of our Travelogue participants. Also, thank you to those folks who donate to our Travelogue. With your continued support, we can keep these events free for all. And John says he will be sending out some more information, so we'll be able to look at some of those resources that he is going to send to us later on our own. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.